There is no rest for the wicked, and there is certainly no shorts of twists and turns in this race for Mikel Merino. We've got updates on him, Eddie Nketiah, Aaron Ramsdale, and some awards being given out last night in London. Today, of course, brings you, as always, at 8 a.m, the Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. It is incredibly appreciated. I hope you've had a fantastic week so far and that you're doing very well, and those views and yours are also good. Thank you for joining us live if you are indeed doing so. If you're listening on catch up, thank you to you. We really appreciate your kind support on the channel. And with it being Wednesday, we're closing in, of course, already on a weekend which contains another Arsenal fixture. But good morning to those joining us in the chat box. Good morning to Paul and Blackshine, Brian, Matt G, Adagoke, Damien, Sir Nicholas, Maximius, Matt G, Sergio. We've got Jose and James and Barry, Brad, Martin, Blackshine, Paul, Rich, Tony, Z, Jamil, Stephen, Grant, Paul, Gooner76, Luke, Emmanuel, and plenty more of you guys and girls in the chat box as well. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. It is very much welcomed. And if you could ever be so kind to drop a like on the video and help us on our way to 1K every day. And a massive thank you for everybody helping us to reach 59,000 subscribers yesterday as well. We are very much closing in on that 60K target. It was set as kind of this year's overall year push to see if we could get to the Emirates Stadium capacity by the end of 2024. And of course, we are now just under 2,000 away from that. 60,704 is the target. So we're closing in. So if you are new to the channel, or if you watch every morning and you're not subscribed, please do help us out by subscribing as we try and to reach our target by the end of the year. Maybe you've been unsubscribed. YouTube sometimes, for some reason, decides to unsubscribe people at random. So make sure you're subscribed. And if you're having issues, drop me a line and I'll try and help you out. Anyway, right, let's jump into today's stories, shall we? We start with last night's PFA awards. Arsenal had 5 players named in the PFA Team of the season. Moving on from obviously last year's awards where Aaron Ramsdale was included in the squads. Unsurprisingly, another Arsenal goalkeeper was included in the squad as well. David Raya was the goalkeeper this time, along with both William Saliba and Gabriel Magalhaes as well. It was a very interesting absence for Bukayo Saka, you could argue. Ben White maybe as well. I personally think Ben White was the best right back in the league last season, although you could argue I'm slightly biased. Martin Odegaard and Declan Rice, though, making up the rest of the team for Arsenal. Arsenal had the most representation of any team in the Premier League last season, again highlighting the strong recruitment, the work that's gone into squad building, and where this Arsenal team are currently at and the level to which it is performing as well. For those wondering why Saka wasn't involved, they deemed that Phil Foden, Erling Haaland and Ollie Watkins were the best front three. I personally don't have too many issues with that. The only issue I have is obviously with these teams this season, or you often see is players kind of shoehorned into the 11 despite them not being a winger. So, Foden, Haaland and Watkins as a front three. I suppose what you could do is play Foden at 10 and then play 2 up top is arguably what you could do. But I think that Watkins and Foden and Haaland deserve to be in that squad, which makes it very difficult for Saka to be involved. Rodri was the other midfielder as well, involved in the full team of the season. And I think it's interesting, obviously, that Arsenal have had back-to-back goalkeeper inclusions in this compared to seasons gone by where our goalkeepers have been nowhere near PFA awards in general. The other defenders, as I say, were Kyle Walker and Virgil van Dijk in the defence. Moving forwards and into transfer stories, though, Aaron Ramsdale's exit is not considered to be close. Not yet. Arsenal are said to be prioritising a permanent exit for Ramsdale this summer, but as up to this point, So far, only loan proposals have reached Arsenal's desk. We know that Ajax have had a loan proposal turned down. We know that Wolves have come forward as potentially, proposing a loan situation for Ramsdale as well. But this has so far not been agreed. Arsenal would like to see Ramsdale leave on a permanent exit so that they can, of course, reinvest that money in a goalkeeper they see as a long-term competitive option for David Raya. I personally, from my perspective, I would be surprised to see Ramsdale leave permanently. I do think that what we will see is him leave maybe closer to deadline day, maybe on deadline day, on loan, get a season of football under his belt, playing regularly, return to Arsenal in 2025, and hopefully earn Arsenal a significant amount of money. And then, of course, maybe Hone Garcia is the goalkeeper, of course, that comes in to replace him. Although suggestions are that £25 million buyout clause is what it would take to get the deal done, which I just think is exceedingly expensive. But that's the scenario for Arsenal at the moment in terms of goalkeepers. Eddie Nketiah, meanwhile, would become Nottingham Forest's highest paid player if he fails to reduce his wage demands. Suggestions surrounding, of course, Forest's interest in the player have not waned since that £25 million bid was rejected, and talks between Arsenal and Forest are ongoing over reaching a compromise to see Eddie Nketiah join the Premier League relegation battlers. It would be a deal, of course, that we hope does happen, but it continues to be something of a risk for Arsenal to have taken. I said and have said for a number of weeks that £25 million was my cutoff. That was the number that I was happy to see Arsenal get. That number has come and gone. And Arsenal, of course, now are in a little bit of an unknown patch as Edu looks to maximise the potential profit from Eddie Nketiah's deal. Of course, there remains to be, from my perspective, a lot of misreporting of Eddie Nketiah's wages. There were suggestions yesterday of £120,000 per week, which I just cannot see making much sense. There's been no suggestion at all up until this summer that he's on that high of a wage. And yeah, there are some suggestions that the wages are as low as £77,000 per week. So as I've mentioned to you before, wages continue to be the most widely misreported and varied in terms of its reporting factor in all of football. But yes, Eddie Nketiah, a player that, of course, will continue to give you updates on as and when they arrive to us. But as always, our headline story continues to be Mikel Merino, the Real Sociedad midfielder. Now, reports in Spain have claimed that Arsenal have now had a second bid of 29.8 million, 35 million euros rejected by Sociedad, as the Spanish club are holding out for 40 million euros, which is around 34 million pounds. The president, Aperribe, is reportedly flying to London in order to try and close a deal for Merino with Arsenal. And they are going to be looking to maximise whatever they can. We said this the other day. All this talk of Arsenal being supposedly close and that a deal had been agreed and all of these suggestions. This has been the most frustratingly misreported story of all stories, I think, to do with Arsenal and transfers, as long as I can remember. I'm having to go back to some crazy days of Julian Draxler and Sebastian Frey to remember a reporting storm with so much variance of different claims about this story. It is said to be advanced and close for better part of a month now, which cannot be true. Absolutely cannot be true. It's such a strange story, this one. It's such a strange continuation of this wacky world of transfers. Arsenal, as of 2 weeks ago, had not made an official offer. Official offers have, and at least one we know has gone in and was knocked back. However, we are where we are and they are where they are. And we are both clubs that are wanting to maximise what we can for the players that are leaving. And we would be doing the same thing in their situation. And he is a player that Mikel Arteta is entirely convinced by. And so Arsenal will try to find that compromise. Talks will continue this week, as there was optimism that this would be a deal that could be done this week. And at this point, Arsenal are very committed to trying to get this one done. So let's keep the fingers crossed that it turns out to be successful, but it's, my goodness me, it's tough. And I just hope to bring you some good news in the coming days as well. The good news I can bring you is, of course, that there is a VPN service that will offer you the safety and security you need better than any other. And that, of course, is NordVPN, which by going to nordvpn.com/Gooner, you can get yourself a significant discount off a 1 or 2 year plan. And you get 4 months extra thrown in free on top of that 2-year deal as well. If you're not happy with the service for whatever reason, you get a 30-day money-back guarantee. And not only that, of course, but it gives you the ability to change your geolocation on loans anywhere among the territories that Nord supports. Furthermore, Arsenal, our Arsenal prizes can be picked up at Football Prizes, which of course continue to be a supporter of the channel. Plenty of different types of competitions available on the Football Prizes website, of which you can find a link to down in today's video description. Regular Arsenal themed prizes are available. I recommend that you go and peruse the options and go and have a look at what is available at the moment. There was previously a Martin Odegaard shirt that could be won. There's chances to win some other Arsenal shirts available on the website right now. So I recommend you head over there and go and check out the prizes as soon as possible. Right, this is part 2, right after this. Right, we're going to start part 2, and we're going to start it in a somber way because this is a very connected community here at TGT, and a very it can be a very emotional place sometimes. And what makes this community, I think, so special is the openness that so many of our listeners share with us, so many of their stories. And very sadly, Trevor, who I know that you've heard the name of in the chat box when we mentioned some of his comments so regularly in the chat box, is a long-term contributor, and sadly shared with us this morning that he lost his partner yesterday, which is incredibly sad. And so, Trevor, I would love to send you all the wishes of support and togetherness and love of this TGT family. Thank you for your support of the channel, and I'm sending you all the strength in the world that we can. Don't feel like you can't reach out to me if you ever need a chat. My DMs are indeed open on all of my platforms, as is there an email available on the website too. So don't hold out. If you ever need to get in touch, I'll be more than willing to have a chat with you, and I extend my grievances to you. And I'm so sorry. Anyway, thank you for all your support, Trevor. And yeah, real tough, that one. We move to your questions. Somberly so, and we'll be tackling your questions as best we can in the chat box. And we're going to start with Mick, who says, do you think Palace will come in for Kivior now they've just sold Anderson to Fulham? It's a really interesting point, actually, Mick, about the situation regarding Crystal Palace, because, of course, Mark Guehi continues to be a defender that they could yet lose, although they're being very firm, if you like, on their position with him and not looking to sell him at all, even for upwards of potentially £70 million. And so maybe if Anderson, and it looks like Anderson is going, Kivior could be an option for them to replace him with. So maybe, Mick, it's not a bad shout, I don't think, whatsoever. I'm scrolling looking for questions, and again, it's so difficult to scroll for questions just because there's so many amazing, kind messages being sent Trevor's way in the chat box, and I hope you're seeing these, Trevor. Let's scroll up to Anthony. Says, Tom, should we just walk away from the Merino deal and go for another target? And the answer to that question is obviously no. The answer is no, unless the fee reaches, beyond £40 million. I've said before that Mikel Merino is a £50 million player. It's worth pointing that out at this moment in time. If he was under a long-term contract, Mikel Merino would be worth comfortably £50 million in this market. And I think that's maybe what people are misconstruing about this situation regarding Merino. The reason why he's significantly below his market value is a number of reasons. One, he's only got a year left remaining on his contract. Two, he wants to go to Arsenal, and he's very much, has told Real Sociedad that he wants to go to Arsenal. And that factor alone is a big, big one. And so Arsenal, of course, are trying to get the best possible deal for the player. but Sociedad want to maximise, La Real want to maximise their, the valuation that they've got for the player. And so for that reason, the negotiations are tricky. In a world where he was under a long-term contract, they wouldn't look to sell him. He hasn't, his buyout clause, I think, is, I don't know if it still exists. Previously, he had a buyout clause of around 50 million pounds. I think it was just higher than 50 million euros. And of course, no club was activating that. Same as Zubamendi, of course, who has a 60 million release clause in his contract, but has rejected the opportunity to move to Liverpool. As we know, they wouldn't have any thought process surrounding selling Merino. They would not want him to go. They consider him absolutely integral to their team. But of course, his scenario has changed that situation. Elliot says, why don't we just go for Fabian Ruiz or another midfielder, get a pre-contract agreement for Merino and sign him next year on a free? I see where you're coming from. There is a priority view of Merino from Arteta's situation. There is a priority of that scenario, if you like, that Arteta is convinced by Merino, and that's what's most important. Ali says, how likely is one, Merino to be an Arsenal player by September? Well, I mean, the window actually closes before September. It closes on August 30th. 2, Eddie being sold for more than 27 million. 3, Ramsdale alone or sale this window. And 4, we bring in an attacker. Rate the likelihood. 4? I think it was just the first 3. It would be like an 8. But including the attacker, it drops to a 4. I'm fairly kind of the view that I'd be surprised to see a forward player come in at the moment, just because of how little time there is left, just because of how long the Merino and the Nketiah situations are kind of going on, and because of the lack of obvious candidates as well for that position at this stage of the window too. Unless some surprises happen, I think you would lean more towards it not happening right now than it happening. Jamil says, would you take Sterling? No. No, I wouldn't. That's one of those scenarios where you're like, it's better to have no one than the wrong player. If it was on loan, maybe a loan for a season. But other than that, no. I wouldn't be buying Raheem Sterling. Lord London says, Arsenal are not making sense this window, not being decisive on getting support for the positions we need strength in, such as the 8, centre forward and right wing, not selling because of the 5 million difference or buying because of a 5 million difference. I think they're making complete sense, to be honest. Arsenal this summer, let's take this apart one by one, shall we? The 8 position they have been decisive on because they know the target they want. They've known who they've wanted for some time, and they are trying to make that happen. There's nothing indecisive about the midfield target. Centre forwards, they had a target at the start of the window. That was Benjamin Šeško, and he decided to stay with Leipzig. And beyond Šeško, there has not been a centre forward that they've been convinced enough by to move for in a market where they're not expected to spend Declan Rice level money. And I'd consider that to be £80 million and upwards, to be honest. Right wing, again, the market has not been that forthcoming with options in the right wing position. Players that, could be competitors like a Johan Bakayoko, for instance, has suggested that he wants to play starting week in, week out, but Arsenal is just not going to happen for him. And the other options, your Leroy Sané, your Kingsley Comans, there is question marks around these players because of injury, because of age profiles, and because of even whether the club that they're at right now wants to sell them. Bayern Munich, of course, didn't land Xavi Simons. Bayern Munich didn't land Desiree Doué. So they didn't bring in those wingers. And so therefore, they have been far less keen on looking to sell the likes of Leroy Sané, Gnabry, or even Kingsley Coman to a lesser degree as well. And then if you look at the not selling because of 5 million euros, it's, again, every single summer up to this point, there's been complaints about Arsenal selling too cheaply, not getting what they value players at. And they have made the decisive decision this summer to not make that the case again. They, if they sell, want to get the maximum value for players and change the reputation of the club. And just lastly, on the point about not buying a player because of a 5 million difference, again, they make the decision to do the best potential business for Arsenal and for our future. If we just spent the odd 5 million extra on every player just to get it done, we'd be in the same situation as Chelsea having spent an estimated 300 million plus more than the market value of the players that they've bought over the last, not 5, 6, 7, but the last 3 years. So actually, yes, Arsenal have been incredibly decisive this window. I know where you're coming from, but when you break it down, their decision-making has actually been very strategic and very measured in the way in which they have, approached all of the different aspects of the window. Tizer says, I definitely think now Eddie's wages are becoming the issue and not the fee. It's both a combined when you consider the prices of other strikers are going. If Eddie's wages were a problem, I just don't think Marseille make 3 bids. I don't think Nottingham Forest come in and make a £25 million bid. I just, this whole the kind of thing about Eddie's wages, not only that, but also like the perspective of Eddie's not good enough. Eddie's a League One player. Eddie's not even a Premier League player. All this crap. Like, if that was the case, clubs like Marseille, clubs like Nottingham Forest would not be making bids well over £20 million to try and sign the guy. So I just think the evidence is against these perspectives, in my view. Southport Gooner says, Breuer, £30 million. Couldn't even get on the Fulham team last year. So why is Eddie such a struggle? Obviously, the Breuer situation is slightly different for Ipswich. Ipswich have done this deal with a loan with an obligation to buy it only if indeed they stay up. If Ipswich go down, Breuer goes back. And Ipswich are ranked as one of the favourite sides to get relegated this season. So it isn't as cut and dry as Chelsea have landed 30 million for Armando Breuer. I don't think it is as simple as that. But I take the point of view on. But I just think there is obviously some nuance into that deal as well. Anthony says, Tom, here, taking the deal is taking too long to do. I'm sorry, but what are we playing at? Anthony, mate, it's just how it works. I'm sorry to tell you. It's just how it works, mate. Beak says, Tom, I can't deny that the Merino deal is starting to get on my nerves now. Do you think the board are also working on other deals at the moment, or are they fully focused on this? I think the full attention is definitely on this deal. It's not to say that there won't be other things going on behind the scenes, but I have little doubt that the full focus, the majority, if not all of it, is indeed on getting this deal done and trying to come to an agreement. I absolutely empathise with people's frustrations around this deal. I do. I empathise with you. But again, I need to stress the point that if we did what Chelsea do and just pay over the odds, like they're paying, I think, something like over 40 million quid for Joao Felix, who has not been a good player for quite a while, on top of already having spent on Mudryk and Pedro Neto and Madueke and Sterling and Nkunku and Jackson. I'm sure I'm forgetting others as well. But that they're spending another 40 million on a player that's not been great, because they wanted to get the deal done. So they're selling Gallagher, who was one of their best players last season, and they're spending more on a player that has not been good for several seasons. It's so baffling to me that there is such a level of not apprehension. What's the word? Apathy. That's the word. That there's such a level of apathy around Arsenal's business, considering where we are and what we've done in the market to this point. Do you know what I mean? Like, think about what Arsenal have done in the market. Think about what squad Arsenal have built. And yet we are still 4 to 5 years into this project, pointing fingers and asking questions. And despite the window not being closed yet, being incredibly judgmental of what business and what processes are going on. That's what I struggle with. Because despite all of the overwhelming positive evidence in support of Arsenal, there's still this kind of like growing apathy towards what we do. So yeah, that's really, really, really key. Let's go to Mark, who says, should we be looking at Real Betis' 18-year-old Senegalese striker, Asane Diao? Do you know of him? It's supposedly a €12 million purchase. I don't know, Mark. I don't know anything. You keep throwing these names at me at times. I haven't got a clue who these guys are. Sorry, Mark. Drunks R Us says, Arteta doesn't appear to like Tony. I'd be more shocked if we bought him, even at 20 million on deadline day. I can see Tony going for free next summer. I think he's going to be going to Saudi from the looks of things, is he not? And I think that's probably indicative of where we're at. Suggestions that, Tony should be getting a move to a Chelsea or a Manchester United or even an Arsenal, which I found baffling, has not materialized because he's not good enough. He's not good enough for these teams. And that's why he has not been bought by them. Despite his price tag coming down to around 30 to 40 million pounds, Arsenal, Man United, Chelsea aren't interested in Ivan Toney, and that is very, very telling. It is interesting to me that the same people that have been saying things like, oh, other teams weren't interested in Calafiori, or other teams weren't interested in Jesus when we signed him, despite that not being true, and yet the same people saying that we should have signed Ivan Toney, despite there being zero interest from Premier League clubs in Ivan Toney. So that's very, very interesting indeed, I think, and very, very telling indeed as well. Avanas says the problem is with all the attention on Merino in the past forever now, it seems less and less likely that we bring in a right winger. It's worth pointing out that a centre midfielder is definitely more important to sign than a forward player. We absolutely need a centre midfielder more than we do need a forward player. Arsenal, in terms of their midfield options, having seen Smith Rowe leave, we are down in terms of senior options to Jorginho, Partey, Rice, Ødegaard, Vieira. They are our senior options for centre midfielders. We have 3 positions to fill. We need another one. We need another midfielder before the window closes. It is absolutely vital. It was vital before the window opened that we added another midfielder. You could argue that Havertz, of course, can play there, but Havertz should be our starting centre forward this season. So that is really, really, really important as well. And I do think that ultimately Arsenal are doing the right thing by prioritising that centre mid and getting that deal done. But at this moment in time, yes, it looks less and less likely that a forward player will come in. Still says Tom, so Gundogan is signing for City on a free while we're waiting. Waiting? But this is the thing, right? So I obviously recognise certain names in the chat box, at times, and you get a feel for the type of, opinions that are put into the chat box. Still, Mart always tends to put in these kind of critical and, just critical comments. And often they are, often there's inaccuracies within them. But despite my efforts to always try and correct them, they remain. And this is what I have to stress each time. And this is what I have to stress when people turn around and call me condescending or whatever. It's because, and I know that people leave comments in the chat box and sometimes in the comments saying, Tom, I admire your patience, XYZ. But this is the reality. It doesn't matter how many times I explain things, even to the same people, you're still not going to get any kind of learning necessarily guaranteed to change the view. Arsenal aren't waiting at all. If you think Arsenal are waiting, then I recommend going and listening back to every single show that we've done over the last month, because continually Arsenal are in negotiations with Real Sociedad trying to get that deal done. Continually Arsenal in negotiations with clubs over the sale of Eddie Nketiah, and they will be on the lookout for potential options in terms of the wide areas as well. So I struggle with that. I struggle to continue to explain to people time and time and time again, Arsenal aren't sitting on their hands. Arsenal are doing the business. What I would say is that obviously we do this show every single day, every single morning. And 10, 15 years ago, transfers weren't like this. Like no one discussed transfers like this. Social media didn't exist in the same way. YouTube didn't exist in the same way. We do shows every single day. And sometimes a story or a negotiation will be on pause for a number of days. And so because the story has not evolved in 2, 3, 4 days, doesn't necessarily mean that nothing's happening. It just means that there has been a pause in that point of negotiations. Focus is taken elsewhere. Clubs have taken a break. People have had a day off, etc., whatever, and it's not necessarily conducive of the best way to understand what the window is. I remember at the start of the window, as Loga points out here, all these claims about that mystery German player. That was a lot of BS, right? Like, that turned out to be rubbish. And there's been a lot of rubbish that circulated across the window throughout this period, So I do think that it's an element of learning and patience and just understanding where we're at as a window. And the window at the moment is very difficult. It's always been that way this summer. It's been that as a consistent theme. We've spoken about how lacking in forthcoming options there are for Arsenal this window. And that's the area that we are ultimately in. Will says, if there's little evolution in transfer news day to day, do you see much point in reporting on every single detail? Not you specifically, just in general. I absolutely understand where you're coming from. The reality is, Will, is that I enjoy doing this every day because if you will notice that the large portion of these shows are the discussions. That's the part of the show I enjoy the most. Part one of the show is usually 5 to 10 minutes. around that on average. I reckon that part 1 probably averages out at 8 minutes. And there is always stuff to talk about, stuff to discuss. And of course, even when the transfer window's closed, this show becomes the Arsenal news show, and we discuss things. So if you only tuned in this summer, if you only started watching this show in the summer, you'll notice that the episode count on this show is 512. We've also done over 300 episodes of our Arsenal news show. We've been doing this 8 a.m. show for the best part of 2 years plus. Even when the transfer window is closed, we talk about news of Arsenal and surrounding the club in part 1 of the show. But the main part of the show is, of course, part 2, which I enjoy incredibly, and having discussions with you in the chat box. That's why there is. And as soon as we do a show where there is a lack of questions in part 2 to answer, that's when we know it's done. But it has never slowed. And the questions that people come in with every single day are why I commit so much time and enjoyment into doing this show as well. Elliot says, don't you think Adingra, Asana Diao, Rafinha, Coman are seriously being considered for the right wing position? No idea, Elliot. I'm not in the club to ask those questions. I'm not there. I can't sit around and to every single link. I can tell you this. I know there are some people out there that might do that. But if you're in the same position as me, right, and you're in a position where you're in the media and you can build up your contact list and you can speak to people, if you had the ability to be able to, whenever a link emerges, so you see like a story in Spain about a Spanish winger, or you see a link in Brazil about a Brazilian winger, if you went to your sources every single time a player's name arrives and went, is this true? Is this true? Is this true? Is this true? Are we looking at this player? What about this player? Who are we looking at? It's within the club's interest for most of what they do to remain secret, for starters. That's the key thing. It's the club don't want their negotiations to be public. There are certain levels that they are willing to discuss, especially if obviously there's been official offers that have been made, and especially if there's suggestions on the other side of either the player side or the opposition club side of things that have come out. But this is the thing, like, there's no assumption. You can't assume that everybody knows what's going on. Otherwise, you would see the stories coming out absolutely immediately, So that, I think, is what's the most important thing. Oki says, big up, Tom. Appreciate you spending this time with us discussing and debating the Gunners. Thank you, mate. Roy says, who arranges the accommodation for Real Sociedad's president? Does Arsenal book his Airbnb or his hotel? I don't know. Absolutely no idea. Ali says there's 75 likes and there's 1,500 of us watching. You know the drill, people. He's not wrong. There is around 1,500 of you watching today. If you could drop a like on the video, that would be incredibly appreciated. I guess when there's not 1,500 of you odd watching, we won't do the part 2. Anchor says, Arsenal really need a right winger or Gyökeres. Nelson and Nketiah need to be starting elsewhere. If not, why does Arteta play them? Why does Arteta not play them? I suppose because he's got better players at the moment, Anchor, to be fair to him, he has given them some time. He has brought them off the bench at some points, but we've just got better players to use at the moment. So, that's why he's not playing as often, because we had other better players that we can use. Eric says, do you think Havertz could play on the right? I'd never want to see that again. I saw it at Chelsea and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I know I saw a lot of Chelsea I didn't like, but I don't think Havertz as a wide player is conducive to his best performances. He needs to be in the box. He needs to be central. He needs to be on the end of crosses, not in charge of making them. Jack says, if you could take one player from the women's team and sign them for the men's team and have the same impact, who would that be? Well, of course, Arsenal are crying out for a striker, and Alessia Russo, you would imagine, would make the most sense for Arsenal. I think that she is going to prove to be potentially, one of Arsenal's best centre forwards. But I think it's difficult to look much further beyond Alessia Russo, to be honest. So, I mean, Frida Marnham I rate highly. I like Frida Marnham a lot. But I think it's got to be Russo. Amaruguna says, Tom, I'm sure that if there was no movement on Merino's deal, the president wouldn't bother to be allegedly coming over. And it's a completely fair point. Boss says, is there any concern for Kingsley if he comes to Arsenal? We won't be a starter, so his injury problem shouldn't be a problem. As I've said before, Boss, I'd sign him on loan. I have absolutely no qualms about signing Kingsley Coman on a loan deal for the rest of the season. I think that would be a reasonably decent move. But there's no suggestions that indeed that is possible. It's worth pointing out. It's been proposed by a lot of people. We don't know if that is indeed feasible. Dan says, Tom, what can you tell me of Alexander Sorloth, the forward from Villarreal? I was very surprised and looks like he could be a strong across the front. He's done very well, Sorloth. He's gone to Spain, played for a couple of teams there, and obviously has played in the Premier League with Crystal Palace, of course, as well. I do think that he's probably not the centre forward that we would end up going for. I don't think that's the profile of centre forward that Arsenal would be looking to sign. I don't think they see that as the transformative option to go for. And I think, hasn't he moved to Atletico? Says Aditya Sorloth. He has, yes, he's signed for Atletico this summer. So definitely won't be signing him. TJR says, I notice how no one ever asked that question the other way around, as in Saka in the women's team. That might be a bit of a stretch, but of course, this is obviously a show where we focus a lot more on the men's team. So I guess that's why someone's asked that question in such a fashion. There's times where I think it's right to discuss the misogyny in football, of course, but I'm not sure necessarily this was it. Loga says, when they say they want 34 million and then they must be prepared to accept something less than that, that is the way any negotiation works. I mean, negotiations, we hear, as I always say to you, if you base a definitive, unquestionable point of view on the little surface of the iceberg of the transfer window, and that you have an immovable view on a transfer, on a club, on negotiation, on a link, on any player, in my opinion, with respect, it's naive to do that, because you're only exposed to what little is able to be published. You're only exposed to what the media are able to give us and what I, to a lesser extent, can tell you. There are, the media hear things that you're not allowed to publish. We get off the record context about things all the time that we can't talk about because we've been told things in confidence, just to give us kind of a little bit of an informative view on a topic, be that transfers or a player's injury situation or a club stance on something. It's very, very common. And so I always say to people, you can't be immovable on certain positions based upon what you read. And that's why I always say that people are so strong on Eddie Nketiah's wages, despite the fact that wages continue to be one of the biggest misreported elements of reporting. Because there's so much, there's that one end of the spectrum, there's claims of £120,000 per week. At one end of the spectrum, there's claims of £77,000 per week that is obviously not taken into context the signing on fee that he supposedly was given when he signed his new deal. And you know what I mean? This is what I struggle with immovable views on things based upon what you've heard. And then I'll say something or someone go, but this person said this, or this reporter said this. And I'm like, cool. They'll have different sources. They'll speak to different people. They'll have different contexts. And it doesn't necessarily mean that one is right, one is wrong. It's just what you yourself are exposed to, the information that you're aware of. So yeah, it's difficult to have, and I would always recommend not being immovable on any of the points of view that emerge throughout the course of the transfer window. I was certainly of the view that £25 million was my threshold to sell Nketiah at. That's what I wanted. I wanted 25 million. We've reached that stage. It's been and it's gone. And now Arsenal are looking to get more. And I may be indeed proven that I would have been wrong to stand at 25 million as my threshold. And that actually I should have had my threshold higher than that. And Arsenal may prove me wrong in that sense. So, yeah, let's wait and see. Mundafat says, do we need Bakayoko? I think he's a good player. I'd happily have Bakayoko in the team. The problem is, as I've mentioned a number of times, is that he is a specialised left-footed right winger. He doesn't play other positions, and he wants to play only as a starter. From the sad things, he's not really willing to be anything other than that. So for that reason, I don't think we will see Bakayoko at Arsenal. But again, I'm willing to prove him right. Sammy says, where is Bakayoko likely to go? I think that a likelier destination is Liverpool. And you might be like, well, hold on. You just said he's not going to start for Arsenal, so why would he go Liverpool? Reason being is there's an 8-year age gap between Saka and Salah. And Salah's contract, I think, runs out maybe at the end of this season. So it might be that Bakayoko is signed and is given that this pathway to be the successor to Mohamed Salah. Sorry. Brad says, Tom, what's the shirt that you got on? Norway shirt with Mr. Ødegaard on the back, mate. That's what it is. Elliot says, do you think Isak will be an Arsenal target for 2025? I hope so, but I don't know. But I hope so. I hope that he sincerely is a target for us next summer. Evan says, thanks for the time and consistency, Tom. Question, do you think Merino and Rice in a double pivot with Ødegaard and Havertz as forwards against bigger teams provides us more cover for our high press? I think it's a really well-balanced midfield. Rice playing as the 6, Merino playing as kind of your left 8, Ødegaard as your right 8. I think it's really balanced. Merino I think, gives you the best of both worlds. He offers you good defensive combativeness, but he also offers you lots going forwards. He also is a threat in the box aerially, which for us, having that extra element to the team, an extra aerial threat. Declan Rice doesn't tend to score too many headers. I know he's got the one against Luton last season, but beyond that, I'm struggling to think of another headed threat that Declan Rice provides. And also, Declan Rice is our corner taker. It's also worth pointing out. So he's not really in the box for corners. Mikel Merino, for instance, though, is going to be a very valuable asset, I think, when it comes to set pieces and to crosses. Amarul Gooner says, Tom, it's hard to sign a player to cover Saka as players aren't prepared to play second field to him or think that they could replace him. And that is why you try and bring in more of a versatile forward that can play across the front three and can offer you something in the wide area. For the record, I think that Gabriel Jesus is going to use that element. I think we're going to see Jesus potentially used in wide areas as well. Trossard used as a centre forward as well. Martinelli may be used on the right at times too. I think that's ultimately where we're going to see those players used. Mark says, if Merino is worth 45 to 50 million, our last offer was 29.8 and Sociedad wanted 34. Why wouldn't we split the difference? It still wouldn't be. It would still be a non-Chelsea type purchase. Mark, if you make it sound so simple. Reality is we don't know the ins and outs of what's going on in the negotiations. These are just claims. As I said in part 1, these are just reports from Spain at the moment. It's not been corroborated by any reports in England so far regarding those claims that we've had a 34 million euro, 35 million euro bid rejected yet. There's been no corroboration of that. I certainly haven't been able to confirm that. It was just reports that came out from Spain yesterday, and also that Apirabe was flying in. So we are still very much out of the loop when it comes to the finer details of these negotiations. Right. I think that's going to bring an end to today's show. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. It is incredibly appreciated. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Wednesday, and I'll be back with you once again 24 hours later to bring you all the latest from the next day, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Please do drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. It is incredibly appreciated. I'll be back with you, as I say, tomorrow morning, bright and early, 8 a.m. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And once again, I'd just like to send my very kind well wishes to Trevor and his family at what I am sure is an incredibly, unimaginably difficult time. So you're very much in our hearts today, Trevor, and we're all very much thinking of you. See you soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.